Hi, my name is David Knight, and welcome to the Easter collection of those amazing Psalms. Psalm 114, an earth-shaking song. For centuries, Jewish people have sung the words of Psalm 114 just before eating their Passover Seder. It's a perfect pairing to celebrate the story of their rescue. When the Israelites escaped from Egypt, when the family of Jacob left that foreign land, Judah became God's sanctuary, and Israel became his kingdom. It's a national economic rescue story, but it's also theological. This is a song about grace, about God adopting a nation of slaves as his treasured possession. The previous Psalm, 113, told how this is God's way, rescuing the helpless and the downtrodden. Who is like the Lord our God, who raises the poor from the dust, and lifts the needy from their misery, and makes them companions to royalty. These two songs, 113 and 114, begin what is called the Egyptian Hallel, a 6-psalm cantata that celebrates Israel's exodus from Egypt. Psalm 114 highlights the barriers they had to face on the journey, formidable barriers that simply crumbled before them. Verse 3 says that the Red Sea took one look and split apart, and the Jordan River turned tail and ran. Verse 5 asks, "What happened, sea, that made you run away? And you, O Jordan, why did you turn back?" This is called a taunt song. Like kids on the playground making fun of their scaredy-cat friends, Israel revels in how God has taken their side, and that not even natural boundaries could stand in God's way. In fact, creation itself is mobilized to serve God's purposes for his people and to bring them home. Verse 4 sings about mountains dancing. The mountains skipped like rams and the hills like lambs. You mountains, what made you skip like rams? Exodus tells us that Mount Sinai trembled under a thick cloud with thunder and lightning, but our psalm poetically transposes that fearsome scene into a playful metaphor of lambs gamboling with joy. This is the art of songwriting. What happened as God rescued Israel and sealed his covenant with them was so astounding, so momentous, that it deserves excessive, imaginative language, befitting the almost unbelievable story of God's extravagant grace. Nature surrenders before the awesome presence of God. So the psalm concludes by urging all of creation, "Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob." The word tremble has connotations of both agony and delight. To quiver with fear or awe and adoration, but also to dance as Israel did at the Red Sea with ecstatic relief and joy. The powerful, majestic presence of such an astonishing grace evokes both mouth-stopping awe and exuberant joy. And that's why I include this psalm in the Easter collection, because both Exodus and Easter were eruptions of freedom and joy, radical transformation, and new beginnings. The early Christians saw the story of the Exodus as a prototype of God's victory over every hostile power. In the Exodus, God overturned the tyranny of Egypt and restored dignity to Israel. In the same way, the resurrection of Jesus broke the tyranny of sin, and death itself crumbled when confronted by the radical love and perfection of Jesus. The resurrection was a truly earth-shaking event in which God set his creation free and welcomes us home as his own treasured possession. Matthew's Gospel reports an earthquake at the time of Jesus' resurrection, which suggests a cosmos that has been groaning in bondage, suddenly feeling the first tremors of the new creation. One day, this creation will convulse in its final birth pangs of liberation and transformation. Earth and sky will flee from God's presence as the old order retreats and gives way to God's new heaven and earth. That's the beginning that is already breaking in on us since Easter. and which deepens our confidence and joy as we read our psalm with the resurrection of Jesus in mind. The Exodus is magnified in the liberating power of Jesus and his living presence with us. The closing line of the psalm alludes to God's faithful provision for his people as they crossed the thirsty desert. He turned the rock into a pool of water. Yes, a spring of water flowed from solid rock. In these words, Christians see Jesus as the living water who accompanies us through the wilderness and sustains us. In Psalm 114, our fears or our sense of self-sufficiency is dwarfed by the all-sufficiency of Christ. His energizing presence is especially relevant for us in a pandemic world with its challenges of deprivation and uncertainty. Both this psalm and the resurrection remind us that nothing can stand in the way of God's purposes for us. Psalm 114 is a psalm of hope that looks back to the past, in the Exodus, and for us, Easter, in order to frame the pain and the puzzles of the present within the hope of what God is going to one day do. So, anchor your hope today in the earth-shaking but true and life-giving Easter affirmation, the Lord is risen. He is risen indeed. Happy Easter.